the Office of the Leader of the Opposition press conference for March 16, 2023. Today I'll introduce my panel. From my right, there is none other than the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Marvin. To his right, there is Mr. Marvin Williams, and to his right is Mr. Elson Lowe. Welcome to today's press conference. Today's press statement will be read in 3 parts. And we will begin with the first part with the Leader of the Opposition.
The opposition continues to promote national unity. The opposition AP and UAFC, including the People's National Congress Reform, have always and will continue to promote national unity and oppose anything that will undermine national unity, including the divisive approach of the People's Progressive Party. This has been manifest as we promoted social cohesion in government and continue to do so at present. As party leader, I was invited to speak at the WPA public meeting held on Thursday 9 March at Buxton Line Top. The PPP seems bent on being dictatorial. The opposition believes that Mr. Tacoma Gunsi's right to free speech must be respected, even though we believe that his language could have been better chosen. The choice of his language is his preserve. Any attempt to use the law against Mr. Gunsi will further erode the guardrails of democracy. It will add to the continued violation of the rule of law by the PPP regime. It is opposite to note here that at present there are a number of trumped-up charges against many innocent Guyanese, including those trumped-up terrorism charges. The PPP will do well to promote democracy and stop the slide into dictatorship. Mr. Gunsi accurately described the situation in Guyana, and probably out of frustration, he went a little too far. The government seems hell-bent on using the opportunity to increase their repression rather than to recognize the problems in the society and seek to solve them. We believe that good sense should prevail, and the government should grasp the opportunity to address the problems raised by Mr. Gunsi. The government buries its head in the sand to its own detriment. Attacking Mr. Gunsi in the opposition will not solve the problem. The PPP's call for civil society to condemn Mr. Gunsi is hypocritical, since it was the same PPP through its second vice president that condemned civil society, contending that they were not voted for and therefore have no right to petition the government. We reaffirm our commitment to and support for civil society. The police must not continue to be misused against the PPP's political opponents. There is a legitimate expectation that the police should investigate Barra Jack Deo for his alleged involvement in fraud and corruption as disclosed in the Vice News documentary. The nation awaits the police action on this matter of critical importance to the people of Guyana. The Anti-Terrorism section in the Criminal Law Offenses Act has long been repealed. The government must drop all terrorism charges against ordinary citizens. We are already on record in rejecting outright the government's use of the anti-terrorism provision in the Criminal Law Offenses Act to bring charges against citizens of the country. We have already brought to the nation's attention that this anti-terrorism law was introduced as an amendment in 2002 by the notorious Ronald Gadraj, the then Minister of Home Affairs, the mastermind behind phantom squads and extrajudicial killings. The PPP government is now wickedly using the anti-terrorism law to deal with alleged misdemeanors and other criminal offenses. The PPP's motive is clear: to intimidate and scare citizens from exercising their constitutional freedoms of association, assembly, and peaceful demonstration. Such intimidation of citizens is state terrorism in itself. The law violates basic human rights. It is excessive and counterproductive. We call on decent-minded citizens to raise their voices in condemnation. As we have stated before, The proper course of action to deal with crimes is for the police force to be depoliticized, professionalized, and well-equipped. Turning Guyanese citizens into terrorists is a senseless and depraved approach to crime fighting. Our research, however, has revealed that the anti-terrorism section in the Criminal Law Offences Act may no longer exist in the law books. In January 2016, it was completely repealed by the APNU AFC coalition government. The coalition government instead introduced the Anti-Terrorism and Terrorist-Related Activities Act 2015, which was expressly intended to fight global terrorism and not to fight alleged local criminal offenders. As such, the 2015 Act includes provision, for instance, to combat the financing of terrorism, the creation of safe havens for terrorists in Guyana, the creation of terrorist cells in Guyana, and the use of Guyana as a terrorist training ground. Furthermore, and very importantly, the APNUFC, in repealing the Gadraj legislation, redefined, quote, a terrorist act to largely exclude acts of armed conflict, demonstrations, and protests. The Gadraj provision is silent on that score. Indeed, internationally, the debate still rages as to what should be considered legitimate public struggle against repressive and authoritarian governments. Under the PPP, Guyana has joined Iran and a few other countries where the government uses terrorism laws to suppress the human and constitutional rights of citizens. We intend to formally raise this issue at the international human rights forums and organizations.
Thank you. And now we'll have Mr. Marvin Williams reading.
The EID card deal. The PPP's continued disdain for Guyanese people and institutions. People's Progressive Party government continues to run the country as if it is their personal property. A few days ago, the government in haste signed a US $35 million contract with a German-based company for a single electronic identification system and cards that will be issued to Guyanese. There was no public consultation, no parliamentary review, no new legislation, and no proper public procurement procedure. The electronic ID card deal was simply dumped on the Guyanese people. The entire process is teemed with potential for corruption. Worse, the PPP has shown no regard for the far-reaching implications an EID card system will have for 1, citizens' privacy rights and comfort levels, 2, the security and integrity of the central data system that will produce the cards and store data, and 3, the continued use of the current ID cards, especially for voting purposes. One wonders why the government would want such ID cards to use, but does not want it for electoral purposes. Clearly, the government means no good and is intent on staying in power through fraudulent means. We warn again that the PPP's lack of accountability and transparency, and note that it will continue to create greater mistrust between government and its citizens. And greater mistrust leads to greater social and political instability. The PPP regime seems to be hell-bent on raising tensions in our society at a time when we should be working together to ensure that all Guyanese benefit from our oil and gas resources.
Thank you. Mr. Elson Law.
Guyana is on the brink of becoming the world's newest kleptocracy. After months of relentless pressure to release the new model PSCs for shallow and deep water blocks, the government has finally given in to opposition and civil society demands that these documents be publicized. Now, having released the documents, the government is giving the Guyanese people a mere 2 weeks to review them and raise objections. An agreement of this magnitude should be subject to a much longer period of public scrutiny and should be laid in the National Assembly and debated before being finalized. These documents could easily govern over 100 billion US of oil revenues over the next few decades, and as such are of utmost importance as Guyana seeks to benefit optimally from its natural endowment. The PPP believes 2 weeks are sufficient for review, just as they believed 2 weeks were sufficient to review the Natural Resources Fund bill in 2021. It would appear that the more money involved, the less the PPP wants Guyanese to see these documents. This is a sure sign we are being ruled by a dictatorship and a kleptocracy. Many must surely be alarmed at Guyana's recent suspension from the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. A suspension which means that the beneficial owners of the companies awarded any oil blocks could be unknown. As a result, we don't know who these oil blocks will truly be awarded to. Again, this raises the specter of kleptocracy, as the PPP elite could form a consortium with an international oil company and then award the oil blocks to themselves, their friends, family, or favorites. That is their common practice. On the other hand, what must international investors be thinking when they see such a lack of transparency and accountability in government, and lack of respect for the people and institutions of Guyana? Is it that only the friends of Second Vice President Barajagdeo, like Sue, will receive quote-unquote the support, to quote the Second Vice President himself? Let us not forget that Sue alleges that he paid a quote-unquote much larger bribe for an oil company, an allegation that is still to be properly investigated. Will Sue make an appearance at the oil block auction under the guise of a shell company? How many legitimate foreign investors will be pushed out in order to favor the PPP's chosen ones? Many foreign businesses and government delegations visit Guyana with an interest in investing here. How many of them are turned off by a government that prefers to favor its cronies? How many jobs could they have created in a free and fair business environment? Would their investments have lowered the cost of living by encouraging competition? Guyana and Guyanese suffer when businesses are turned off by the practices of an increasingly secretive, arrogant, and kleptocratic government. Kleptocracy literally means government by thieves. We must not let the PPP steal the remaining offshore oil blocks. It will entrench an oligarchy that has little interest in the plight of the average Guyanese. It will amplify inequality beyond measure. It will embolden those who wish to subvert our democratic institutions. If the PPP doesn't care about poverty now, imagine how much less they will care from the decks of their yachts. The government must commit to releasing all beneficial ownership information for awardees in the oil block auction. Further, the government must lay the new model PSAs before the National Assembly for debate. Failure to do so should fill every Guyanese with dread. What kind of future are we facing under the PPP?
All right, at this time, we will take questions on the first statement.
Good morning,
Good morning.
panel, moderator, good morning.
Good morning.
Adam Harris. Mr. Norton, I noticed that you were at pains to defend Organ Messiah and to react to the fact that the government said that there was silence on the part of the opposition. So the WPA is not a part of the coalition. So why should it be a big thing for you to justify excusing Mr. Owenside?
Well, first of all, I didn't justify. I was present at the meeting, and what Agunse did outside, like we have said, bad choice of language, he described in a very correct way the state of governance in the society. He identified the inequities, the inequalities, and also the misuse of the Ghana police force. Now, as the leader of the opposition, I have to look at all that was said and then arrive at a conclusion. The conclusion that has been arrived at is that, yes, there might have been a wrong choice of language, but that the issues raised by Mr. Gunse are relevant, important, and the government, rather than resorting to repress people, should address the issues. Is it not true that there's an outcry that contracts are going to PPP friends' favorites, and that in large measure the African Guyanese community is excluded? The answer to that is yes. Mr. Gunse said that, and that is a true reflection of what is happening. So I don't see it as an attempt to defend anyone. I see it as an approach in which we identify the weaknesses in what happened, and we underscore the facts that emerge from it and call on the government to address them rather than seeking to repress people.
Thank you. I see the hand of Mr. Jebon Vickery.
Good morning, team. Mr. Norton, this question is for you. Several members of the opposition had come out and condemned what Mr. Gunse and the other woman had said at the meeting. You're now saying as opposition leader that he spoke facts, basically, and it was just, like an overstep with what he was saying. How do you think this will look to persons who are basically saying, it was racial in some sense, but it might be looked at as you're encouraging this as opposition leader?
Well, I am not encouraging. If you note, I said we will promote national unity. You will note that we did not endorse the language used, but we have made it very clear that what it describes is the reality in Guyana. As it relates to the woman, first I want to say I am in opposition to anybody, including the PPP government, that treats any ethnic group with any form of disrespect in their language. I have absolutely no problem saying that, and I've said that on many occasions. But what I will not do is provide it as an opportunity for the government to become more repressive and for the government to shift away from the discrimination, etc., that are occurring in the society. And may I say this to you? There are many people who agree with what Ogunsi would have said. They might not have got the courage to do like I do and say, look, bad choice of language, but when it comes to reflection of the reality, it did. Where was the outcry when you had Sugate and the police should have acted? They never did act. Do you see that as the government condoning corruption and alleged bribery in high places? And that will impact all of us in an unparalleled way. And so one has to be very, very clear. We're opposed to racism. We're opposed to the use of that type of derogatory language. But that does not remove the fact that the government operates in a partisan, racist way. And in addition, it is involved in political discrimination because there are Indo-Guyanese in this society that support us, that face the brunt of the discrimination. There are indigenous people that support us, that face the brunt of the discrimination. So we must not lose sight that the fight is against discrimination. And that is what I want to see on the issue.
I have a follow-up. Mr. Hines, 2 nights ago on the show, had called you out, challenging you basically to address this issue. He also said, in some sense, that claims from the, well, not claims, condemnation coming from members of the opposition were like basically handing Mr. Agonsi and the other woman over to the enemy. That's what he said. What are your thoughts on those comments coming from Mr. Hines, who's also a WPA executive member?
Well, I don't know what Mr. Hines said, but Mr. Hines is a leader, one of the leaders in his party, is entitled to articulate its party position. It, however, doesn't impact our position. As you would recognize, I have outlined a position that I think is clear in thought, clear in vision, and it is clear in terms of its consequences for the society. I will not get into what Mr. Hines would say or wouldn't say. That is the preserve of the WPA. But the president went on. The president should have been somebody who would have sought to bring some amount of order to the situation. But he proceeded to describe people as terrorists and raising this idea of utilizing the terrorism law. So should I be influenced by that? No, we have a different interest. The president, the vice president, they are interested in creating tensions because they believe tensions will result in a clash between the ethnic groups, and they believe that once that happens, a lot of the persons, Indo-Guyanese in the PPP, and in their support base who are dissatisfied with them, it will act as a means of rallying them. And so it is in their interest, they believe, to promote that. It's not in our interest. It is in our interest to identify that they are seeking to create tensions, that they are seeking to create the conditions for there to be an ethnic and political clash. They believe that will serve them. We believe that we will continue to oppose them. We will call them out on their racism. We'll call them out on their divisiveness. We'll call them out on their incompetence. We'll call out the entire kleptocracy that is robbing Guyana of its resources.
I think it's interesting that the People's Progressive Party is seeking to condemn something said at a public political meeting. But in so doing, the president, who is commander-in-chief of the armed forces, seeks to poison the atmosphere, seeks to poison the environment in which this matter is to be treated with. Here's the commander-in-chief who commands basically the Guyana Defense Force and the Guyana Police Force, saying that someone, in his view, committed an act that was treasonous, committed an act that was terroristic. What is the police to do? How is the police to pursue this matter? How is the judiciary to treat with a matter if it comes before them with respect to these allegations? You cannot be reasonable, you cannot be responsible to do what Mr. Irfan Ali did. I'm very sorry, but I rather suspect that the media would be doing justice to this issue, will be doing justice to national unity, were they to collectively approach Mr. Irfan Ali and interrogate him on this matter, on his stated position with respect to this matter.
And the question needs to be asked, isn't the president indirectly telling the police to go after people rather than allowing the police to do whatever investigation they need to do and to have it dealt with based on law. One has to be very, very clear in all aspects of this issue rather than treating it like if it is a one-dimensional issue. What occurred didn't occur in a vacuum. It occurred because of a situation in the society, and the attempt by Agunse to highlight that is what generated the problem. So we're clear.
Thank you.
It's a very, I think it is, there has been a correct description of what is happening in Guyana.
Thank you. I see the hand of Mr. Dennis Shabbat.
Mr. Norton, Dennis Shabbat, Librarian. Sir, two questions, and one to Mr. Williams. Sir, to what extent do you believe that your position with respect to Mr. Woods' language will be sending mixed messages to your party's constituency? And two, what will be your expectations as opposition leader from the joint services should there be protests against some of the challenges being meted out to by the government? And to Mr. Williams, will your party be considering, or could you elaborate rather, what might be some of the human rights implications of the proposed step to have national citizenship and work permit cards?
First of all, let me say this. I didn't believe it was the place of the head of the army to comment on the issue. And the fact that I sense he was forced to comment is indicative of the operation of the government. I will judge the army based on its historical performance. The army has not had a history of being involved in the politics of the society. I expect that the army will take a professional approach to this matter, and it is my sincere hope that external forces, including the political parties, including the president, they do not influence the direction of the Guyana Defense Force. The Guyana Defense Force need to continue to be a professional outfit, but we must not fool ourselves. The average man in the Guyana Defense Force feels the pinch they cost to live in. The average man in the Guyana Defense Force, the African Guyanese in Guyana Defense Force, feels the racism. He might not have on his uniform, and he's in his community, and he will feel and face the racism. So one has to draw a distinction between the army operating as an institution, as well as noting that there are many individuals in the army who will share our position, but because of their role as professionals, they wouldn't comment, and we don't expect them to comment. But that is not to say they don't know the reality. Many of them meet me on the road and tell me they're dissatisfied with what is happening in the Guyana Police Force. It is being destroyed, that it is being used politically. But they, as an institution, wouldn't come out and say that. And I don't expect them to. But also, as a Guyanese, I am aware that all of the people in the Guyana Defense Force and the police force, they are human beings who face these challenges, and in some regard, they would like to see change.
This whole question, Mr. Shabral, of the EID cards, it speaks directly to the PPP's duplicity. On the one hand, the PPP says no to biometrics for the purposes of holding democratic elections, free and fair elections. On the other hand, they come with the EID card and they intend to use it to get to the bottom of people's personal information so that they can persecute persons who they deem to be in opposition to them, not to be supportive of them. The intention is to use the information to control people, to manipulate people, to direct what people can and cannot do based on holding things over their heads. So if you do not, on the one hand, want to use biometrics, you bluntly refuse biometrics for the purposes of voting, biometrics at the place of poll, something that the People's Progressive Party had called for in 2015, but now reject. This would lead us to a place where we can have, to a great extent, the elimination of duplicated voting, the elimination of the dead voting, the elimination of persons outside of the jurisdiction having votes cast for them. This is more important than anything that the People's Progressive Party can make up to come and say to the people of this country that here's an EID card and you have to take it. People in this country have a right to information. People in this country have a right to freedom of expression. You do not address people's right to information with this imposed EID card. You have not allowed the people's elected representative to consult with them and to present their case before the National Assembly with respect to this matter. That is a constitutional right of every citizen of this country, to elect persons to represent them and to have those persons represent them at all levels. So the People's Progressive Party is clearly exercising its dictatorial tendencies to acquire information on every single citizen of this country for purposes of domination, manipulation, and absolute control, while totally ignoring the need for a simple addition to the electoral process that will guarantee us democratic elections that they have been calling for, that they have been suggesting does not exist, and free, fair, and acceptable electoral results with the elimination of multiple voting, and above all things, presenting the nation with a clean, acceptable voters list for the holding of any elections in the future.
And I want to add a few things. As I understand the law, this question of national registration falls under the Elections Commission. You have a law governing national registration, the first thing. The second thing, what do you do with the present ID card? Are there going to be two sets of ID cards in a world where you're trying to synchronize identification so that there be one that is linked all around? Then there is the question of procurement. I want to know if Guyanese know that this middleman is the same middleman that the government went through to buy the Sputnik vaccines that cost us double the price that we should have paid for it. Now, clearly this is another corruption scheme. There are cheaper options. We were engaging some people overseas, and the information that is emerging is that there are cheaper options. Now, why have you single sourced this? Why is it you sign an agreement, then come and tell the Guyanese people there was no indication before? Have we abandoned the Procurement Commission? Has Second Vice President Barra Jackdio become our Procurement Commission? I don't think so. And so it must also be a violation of our procurement laws. And the Vice President merely saying that it is legal doesn't make it legal. Who are the other persons that tended to get this particular contract? There are a lot of issues here that must be addressed. Put all of that aside. What gives the right to the Second Vice President Barra Jackdio to determine critical matters involving millions of dollars outside of the parliament, a parliament which he doesn't attend. He shows contempt for the Parliament of Guyana. He doesn't attend, and as a logical sequel, it does appear that he does not believe there's a role for the Parliament on these issues. So there is no parliamentary engagement or oversight. There is no procurement done in the proper way in keeping with the law. This is not done by the people responsible for national registration, and therefore, clearly, this is a corrupt scheme. And at the bottom of it all, it's going to be the violation of people's human rights.
Like all has been said by yourself and Mr. Williams, what's next? How do you hope to seek redress?
I just wanted to build quickly off of that. Some of the core questions to help Guyanese to understand the real implications of this is there's a real possibility that if a Guyanese person opens a bank account, the PPP will know which banks your bank accounts are at. PPP will know that. When a police officer stops you to check your driver's license, they will also perhaps know that you're on public assistance. These are the types of things which can cause prejudices to affect people and to raise discrimination, but they can also be used in government surveillance to target Guyanese who the government is unhappy with. So if as a contractor you file a complaint, PPP knows which bank you bank at, PPP can target you in various ways. This is extremely concerning, and the more that you think about it, the more ways it is concerning. Really, first of all, we need the appropriate legislation to deal with this. But second of all, we need to look closely at the scope of this ID card, because that is one of the really concerning things, is that the scope seems to be so broad.
Interestingly as well, tax information is highly confidential, and even the tax department is prevented by legislation from revealing critical tax information of any taxpayer for that purpose, for that matter, for public consumption. Is this ID card going to allow anyone who reads it, accesses it, to know a person's tax position? Is that not going to be in violation of the Tax Act? And finally, on this issue, the People's Progressive Party has attacked the coalition administration for allegedly sole sourcing birth certificates and so on. Those birth certificates were in fact high quality and high security features, and carried high security features. The condemnation that flows forced the People's Progressive Party to abandon that high quality material that was used for the preparation of birth certificates, and they have returned to paper birth certificates with zero security features. That too is suspicious. Why do you want to relax the security features on birth certificates while you want to increase the security features and available information on a national identification card? Is it that on the one hand, with respect to birth certificates, you want to allow yourselves the freedom to register migrants who have arrived on this country's shores for electoral advantages, contrary to the law, while on the other hand, you want to ensure that Guyanese citizens are controlled by you because of the information that you have at your disposal, you referring to the People's Progressive Party. So these are all questions that are out there yet unanswered.
But it's also a significant step in the movement in the direction of totalitarianism. Now, when you're an authoritarian state, you use the authority of the state to dominate. But there will be elements of people's life that you might not be able to dominate. When you take a move like this, you have become totalitarian. You are seeking to dominate and control the totality of people's lives. And this here is a clear step in the direction of totalitarianism. I think as Mr. Cabral asked, what needs to be done? First of all, we have given you the information on this. one of the things we expect to happen is for the press to press the government on these issues. The second thing, we will continue to educate people because people need to know to be able to react to it. So all of us have to be involved in exposing what is happening and ensuring that it doesn't succeed.
Mr. Marvin, you didn't answer one of my earlier questions. That is to say, to what extent do you believe that your position on the wouldn't say matter as far as the language is concerned is sending mixed messages to the constituency which yourself and the WPA to some extent share?
I sent a clear signal to our supporters, wherever they are, that we, as it relates to local government elections, we have decided that we're not going to leave the playfield open for the PPP. That is one clear signal. And this predated whatever was said by the WPA. And mind you, the AFC said they were not going to run, and they were part of the APNU AFC. The WPA said they wouldn't. But we have analyzed our situation, and we have concluded that we will. As it relates to the Agunse matter, I have the tendency, before I speak on these issues, to feel out our constituency. And a lot of people in our constituency believe that while the language was not the best, he correctly described the situation they find themselves in. And so I do not believe it will send mixed signals. In fact, it sends a clear signal that we acknowledge that there is widespread racism, that our people are not getting contracts, etc. And to that extent, we agree that Agunse reflected the Ghana situation accurately, albeit the choice of language could have been different.
I see the hand of Ms. Tamika Garnett. Ms. Garnett?
Good morning, everybody. Tamika Garnett from the Ghana Chronicle.
Good morning.
Two questions I have from this statement. My first question also is about the situation at the public meeting. Several Indo-Guyanese members of the PNC came out to note their concerns about the remarks made by Mr. Agunse and Mr. Lane. This situation is coming just a few months after a PNC member had claimed racial hostility within the party. Are there any concerns for how these continued events involving race and the party is affecting the Indo-Guyanese members in the party, as well as the party's outlook to Indo-Guyanese voters and its ability to attract those crossover voters?
No.
The second question, you want to answer that one first?
I have no problem. First, I want to say this. We continue to be a party that promotes national unity. In our party, we have engaged all African Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese, indigenous people. We articulate their positions. Even in our presentations on discrimination, we don't limit it to discrimination based on ethnicity. We also include political discrimination, which the Indo-Guyanese community that support us face. We also identify discrimination against the indigenous community. Many of our members who are indigenous people face discrimination, and we highlight it. We believe that as a party, we have approached this question of promoting national unity, promoting social cohesion. President David Granger actually had a department promoting social cohesion. We continue to promote social cohesion in our party, any ethnic group is allowed the opportunity to express their views, and we do not stop them from expressing their views. So I do not know about any negative impact.
All right. My other question is, the opposition continues to claim racial discrimination against Afro-Guyanese. The government, in condemning against that, is saying there's no structured discrimination, and they point to programs such as their housing programs and their scholarship programs, where the number of Afro-Guyanese, they're saying it constitutes a high percentage of persons benefiting from the programs. On the opposition's part, what structured evidence is the opposition putting forth to show that there is racial discrimination or even this claim of an apartheid state? What is the opposition banking on?
You know, Mr. Nigel Hughes put out clearly the discrimination that is occurring in contracts in Guyana. On numerous occasions, I have pointed out that the government came to power saying they will take back lands from people who got it after the no confidence motion. They took back only from, in the main, the African Guyanese community. Also, I want to turn you to the Auditor General report on COVID-19, in which it is made clear that there was discrimination in terms of the COVID-19 disbursement. The report makes it clear, so that is evidence. But we've said something else. The government could save us all these problems. They can have an ethnic impact assessment done. They can put in the public domain tomorrow how many people of Indo-Guyanese descent got contracts and the amount of money. Because you can give Afro-Guyanese, you can give 200 Afro-Guyanese contracts. But if that amounts to 10 billion and 8 Indo-Guyanese companies get contract that amount to 5.5 billion, then you cannot say to me that is an even playing field. The evidence is out there. I want to invite you to do something. Drive Georgetown, drive the East Coast, drive the East Bank, and find out who are the people with the contracts. You will find on the East Bank Road, there is one African Guyanese with a contract there. All the rest are of one ethnic group. Mind you, we believe that Indo-Guyanese are entitled to contracts. What we are condemning is the PPP giving it to their friends, their families, their favorites, and they are not giving the kind of contracts that are needed to the African Guyanese community and to the indigenous community. Look, in the indigenous community, you have to develop the capacity of the people to be able to undertake contracts. You also have to do that in the African Guyanese community. What we have is an attempt to give people a fish rather than allowing them to learn to fish so that they can access the resources of this country. In Linden, most of the contracts, you will say, go to Afro-Guyanese, but they go to PPP persons. You have a school that should have been built a while now, in which billions are expended and nothing is happening. That is the discrimination we are talking about, and it is widespread in this society. Why is it? Why is it you can give contracts to the billions, but when it comes to public service, you say that if you increase their salaries, it will fuel inflation. But when you are doing infrastructure work, that is far more money than salary increases, you don't see it as fueling inflation. It is clearly a case of discrimination and the government using its resources to asphyxiate some and to promote a quality life among their friends, families, and favorites.
Building off of that, one of the interesting things to note about some of the studies that have been put out by Mr. Hughes is that while on the one hand you do see a vast majority of contracts being awarded to those of a certain ethnicity, you also see that the gap is even larger, as Lita is alluding to, in terms of the size of the awards and the total amount of awards, such that really you're seeing the bulk of the monies are going towards one particular group. Now, on the flip side, just to highlight again what the leader is saying, when we talk about building capacity, this is vital to ensure that all Guyanese are able to access these opportunities. The argument has been made that if no one of African descent or Amerindian descent applies for contracts, then of course all will go to those of Indian descent. But it is the responsibility of the government to ensure that all Guyanese have opportunity, especially even in the business sphere, and that is where capacity building is important. One of the things that we've talked about is the National Productivity Bank to offer low interest loans and so on. But even, I'll tell you a funny story, a black entrepreneur came to me and thanked me for that policy because he said it would provide an opportunity where we would have fair reading in the banks, fair hearing in the banks, and therefore there would be opportunities provided to Guyanese across the board. We've heard black business people complain about access to credit and so on and so forth. And so it is the responsibility of the government to ensure that all Guyanese have access, to ensure that all Guyanese capacity is built across Guyana, and to ensure that no Guyanese is left behind.
A quick follow-up to the situation about the contracts. Would the APMU be willing to release the racial distribution of contracts under their time in office so that it can be compared with the existing situation? Because it's also being contended that even during the APMU's time in office from 2015 to 2020, majority of the contracts went to Indo-Guyanese, and it's as Mr. Slow pointed out, it has to do with the persons that apply for the contract as well as the persons that are qualified to carry out the works and able to get the contracts. So wouldn't you say that there would still end up being some amount of disparity in the race of persons that end up getting the contract, especially if it was also occurring during the APMU's time in office?
Now, first of all, when the AP and UAFC was in government, all the records would have been left there. The government is in a position, this government very regularly runs to the parliament and tell you everything that was done under the AP and UAFC. I don't know how suddenly they want us to tell them. They have the records, that's first. Second, under the AP and UAFC, we were seeking to implement the 25% for small contractors to widen the base. Now, that had begun to work to reduce the amount that went to the large contractors and let others have. So what I'm saying to you is that while we were in government, actions were taken to deal with the inequalities. What you're having now is an intensification of the inequalities. We believe in government in future, we have to change the procurement laws. And the government can change the procurement laws to facilitate more involvement of non-Indians. In the Amerindian community, for instance, you have to train people so that they can become contractors, etc. In the African Guyanese community, we need to do the same. What we are very critical of is a situation in which the government deliberately excludes African Guyanese. And we believe that is unacceptable. So as it relates to the comparison, you can provide that information. Our focus was also on empowering people through small business. The government in this budget reduced the amount of money for small business, which is an indication that they are not going to promote small businesses among the dispossessed people in this society. We have oil and gas resources. They are not distributed equitably, and those are the issues to be addressed.
Just building off of that as well, it is important for us to understand the influence really of institutional racism, which is where you have a series of systems that work against one group and in favor of another. And really one of the things that's very critical for us as Guyanese to understand is that 25 of the last 30 years the PPP has been in office. And so as a result, they will have had ample capacity, ample opportunity to ensure that Guyanese across the board, that capacity is built for Guyanese across the board to be able to access contracts. 25 of the last 30 years. So if they haven't been able to get more parity and more of an understandable distribution of contracts, then it is not realistic to blame the coalition, but rather, I think any reasonable Guyanese would say that PPP has had ample opportunity to change the situation.
There is also another element that should be addressed. Journalists should ask, in 1992, when the PPP came to power, how many African contractors they had. And then check to see how many of them were destroyed by 2015. I don't want to call names because some of them still fighting to get contracts. But the PPP destroyed virtually all the African Guyanese contractors they met in 1992. So that today, there is no major African Guyanese contractor. And we could talk about what happened to Twiga. People forget. What happened to there was a contractor by the name of Ambrose that was a fairly big contractor when the PPP came to power. I don't want to run down the road of calling the names, but there has been the destruction of the African Guyanese contractors that the PPP meet in 1992. And they, in government, they have the resources at their disposal to put out there who were the contractors that were African Guyanese descent, who were the contractors that were of Indo-Guyanese descent, because they had many in 1992, to the point where Desmond Hoyt was called Desmond Passad. But between 1992 and 2015, they were so destroyed that by the time we got into government, there were hardly African Guyanese contractors with the capacity. So the destruction of the African business base and contractors must be placed squarely at the feet of the divisive and discriminatory policies of the People's Progressive Party.
One last thing that I think is very important for us to mention is that there is often a tendency to think about things as zero-sum. If you're taking away from one person to another person, without really understanding that including all Guyanese and building the capacity of all Guyanese in our economy will benefit everyone. And some estimates indicate that the economy would be as much as 25% larger if we were able to use all of our labor, if we were able to fully use all of our labor, and if we were able to ensure that everyone is given the appropriate opportunities. That will increase competition, which will lower prices, and will have a myriad of economic benefits. But really, everyone is better off when we give all Guyanese access to opportunities and we help to build capacity for all Guyanese. It's not a zero-sum game, but rather the entire country will be better off if we work together.
I don't want the PPP to run after people who are still in the system. But I want to make this point, that when the PPP came to power in 1992, there were African Guyanese with rice mills. The PPP must tell us how many of them exist today. Further, I say no more.
I see the hand of Kaichor News. I think it's Miss Rihanna.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So my question is in relation to the EPA and the 300 megawatt gas-fired Howard plant. So the opposition has often stated the need for the energy project to be supported by studies, but the EPA has waived the need for the EIA for that project. Has anyone in the party opposed this decision by the agency, or does the opposition support the waiver of the study?
We have long said that every major investment with environmental impact must have a proper environmental impact assessment, and therefore we cannot support a waiver on any project.
You said you had another question, Miss Rihanna.
Yes. As it relates to the recently released draft document, I think this question is for Mr. Lowe. I wanted to know his thoughts on what he finds troubling and what he finds commendable in the new provisions in that document.
Thank you. We're currently reviewing the document. Once we've finished that review, we'll give you a comprehensive sense of what our thoughts are on it. There are areas where we believe that some of the language needs to be looked at, but we'll give you a sense of it once we've really been able to put forward a comprehensive response. Now, what we are trying to ensure that Guyanese are aware of is, it is no accident that it is only 2 weeks that have been provided for this document to be reviewed. There is no accident. And so what we're saying is this document needs to be laid in the National Assembly so that it can be properly ventilated, and so that all of the different areas, some of which may not be apparent after 2 weeks, can be put out so that the public can have an understanding of it and we can address them. It is not, I think it is unbelievable that anyone, much less in Guyana, would put a document that has $100 billion behind it for a 2-week review. It is utterly unbelievable, and we need to have a proper national conversation around this document.
So you're basically saying that there needs to be more an extensive period of time to review it?
Absolutely. That is, I think, extremely obvious. And what I'd say is it is deliberate that the government is not giving Guyanese a chance to review the document. In the context of all of the questions that we always have around oil and gas issues, in a country in which the oil and gas industry is going to be vital going forward, it is not acceptable that major contracts, that major agreements are not subject to proper public scrutiny.
In terms of the first question, I need to go back a little bit. In terms of the opposition's position not to, for proper environmental assessment to be done, what course of action does the opposition plan on taking towards possibly lobbying or pushing for that to be done, or trying their best to see how they can get the government or the EPA rather to move in that direction?
Before Mr. Lowe takes that question, I just wanted to add to his earlier response that not only do we believe that it's necessary to be laid in the National Assembly, but also to be put before a special select committee that allows for the involvement of Guyanese citizenry in the conversation to which Mr. Lowe alluded as being absolutely necessary. The second point I wanted to make on that is that the natural resources sector has grown in its importance to this country. Yet we do not see the Natural Resources Sectoral Committee of the Parliament meeting to discuss these issues. That committee has the authority to summon before it ministers of government and heads of agencies to discuss these issues, so that even if the People's Progressive Party does not lay an important document before the National Assembly for discussion and debate, that committee can summon the relevant head of department before it and to get answers for the people of this country. That committee does not meet. It is currently chaired by the People's Progressive Party, and there seems to be no urgency with respect to the committee meeting.
Yes, just as it regards further actions, and I'm sure the leader will want to make his comment, we will continue to educate Guyanese as to what is going on in the country. We'll continue to help Guyanese to understand the implications of what is going on, and we'll continue to work along with civil society and other Guyanese who have an interest in this to as much as possible ensure that what the government does is within the law, and that the government is taking seriously the risks that are associated with these types of projects.
Thank you. I see the hand of Mr. Dennis.
Mr. Marvin, excuse me. Please permit me to take you back to an early issue in relation to Mr. Quincy on your own. What should the joint services do in the context of Guyana and Guyana's ethnic and political construct? In the case of, say, do you believe, for instance, that it should be guided by their ethnic allegiance or not?
I have answered that before, and I'll answer it again. The Ghana joint services need to be professional. They need to avoid being politicized, and they should do their work in keeping with the law.
All right. I see the hand of Mr. Jevon Vickery. Ghana Standard.
Yeah, I have two questions of the topic. First, Mr. Norton. I'll ask both one time. The Ghana Teachers Union has said that teachers are still awaiting their salary increases that were promised to them. This is against the backdrop of everybody from every public sector getting salary adjustments. What are your thoughts on the wait for salary adjustments for teachers? And secondly, last week, your former coalition partner had raised the issue of Exxon's flaring taking place. They spoke about the environmental impacts and the original agreement with Exxon not doing flaring, and it's basically been increased over the years. What are your thoughts on those two things?
First of all, on the teachers, it's a manifestation of the incompetence of the government. This is a matter that should have been easily dealt with. I can't recall, at least when we were in government, where you had increases and then some of the teachers got and some didn't. I mean, it's a clear indication of the incompetence. The thing I would say too, I would also ask you, if you want to engage our shadow Minister Labour, who is very much involved in that, Coretta MacDonald. As it relates to flaring, our position has always been known that the law should be stuck to, and that flaring has negative consequences for our society, and everything should be done to ensure that it stays within the confines of the law and not be permitted by the government or anyone.
And I think we're heading into our last questions.
Yes.
I see Mr. Adam Harris, and I'll take him and maybe one other before we close off today's press conference.
All right. Comrade, you met with a delegation from the United States, and this delegation was supposed to have been from Vice President Kamala Harris. I haven't heard anything from the government about the contents of that meeting. Will you share what you discussed, or what were the discussions about during your meeting, sir?
We sought to discuss democracy and governance, and our position has been made clear. The U.S. made their position on the question of democracy and governance, And generally the meetings surrounded the whole question of democracy and governance in Guyana. There was some touch on security as well, but in the main it focused on governance.
Quick. Was the issue of racism and discrimination and those things, did those terms come up in the meeting, sir?
I would say that they were briefed on discrimination in Guyana, both political and ethnic.
Thank you. And our final question today will come from Ms. Garnett. Ms. Garnett?
Yes.
Yes.
My question is about the situation with the building in Region 9. Can we get an update on what's the situation and if the PNC has brought forth the proof to show ownership of the building as yet?
The building there is ours. We don't have to produce anything to show ownership. We have occupied that building for close to 50 years, and we'll continue to occupy it.
I think more important than the question of proof of ownership, a question from the People's Progressive Party, obviously, is the issue of the rights of the people of Region 9, in particular. Here is a case where the People's National Congress Reform and its partners are gaining tremendous traction in Region 9, increasing our support base in Region 9. Here comes the dictatorial People's Progressive Party, immediately as they take the reins of government, violate the Procurement Act, purchase a number of tractors and equipment and share it out like it's their own gifts to the indigenous peoples, particularly in Region 9. That didn't buy them the hearts of the people in Region 9. And so they came and they sold carbon credits, largely based on the stock of forest owned by the indigenous peoples, largely in Region 9, a region with more than 85% indigenous population. They violated the rights of the owners of the forests. They refused to consult with them. They refused to acknowledge their right to free, prior, and informed consent. They violated their constitutional right when it comes to the ownership of private property by selling carbon credit based on the assets owned by indigenous peoples. And then they said to them, here is 15% of what we got. Take it or leave it. The indigenous peoples pushed back, identified the fact that their rights were violated, identified the fact that they were disrespected, that the place of pride earned in society in this country was disregarded and trampled upon. And so the People's Progressive Party decided, we are going to drive the fear of Jagdeo and Ali into your hearts. And they went like thieves in the night and they broke down that building owned by the People's National Congress Reform and painted in the symbolic colors of the People's National Congress Reform, to say to the indigenous peoples that if you can't give us your hearts because of the gifts we gave you, regardless of the fact that we violated your rights, we're going to treat you just like we treat the PNC building in Region 9. We don't care who owns it. The People's Progressive Party does not care who owns that building. And as a matter of fact, that building is not on the register of assets of Region 9 Regional Administration. And they know it, including Carl Singh. So this is an attempt, having failed to win the hearts of the indigenous peoples through bribery, to drive the fear of the PPP into the hearts of the indigenous peoples. And this is what the media needs to bring out. This is what the media need to publish. This is what the media need to confront the People's Progressive Party with, instead of trying to carry out the People's Progressive Party's wishes of pulling a veil over the eyes of the people, particularly the people of Region 9, deal with the rights issues.
It is also important to note that there's a particular modus operandi of the PPP. They always use people who they have something over. It is not by accident that Carl Singh was used. In fact, if the law had followed its course, Carl Singh should have been before the courts. I don't know which citizen who isn't close to the PPP will be accused of shooting a young woman, as he was accused. And you just hear the charges are dropped against him. It speaks to the fact that the PPP have a number of people around them who they save from prosecution and then utilize them for their nefarious activities. This is just one more added to the list.
And may I add that the contractor is known to the police, and the contractor is known to the courts, and the contractor is known for having been accused and charged with several violations of the criminal law. And what is very instructive in this case is that those who went to that building, broke down the gate, ripped off the roof, ripped off the ceiling, dislodged all doors, removed all the windows, stole 11 barrels of items for the free distribution to the people of Region 9, burnt gifts for little children, including books, and destroyed that place. They have the luxury of having allegations against them swept under the carpet, while those who exercise the right to access, possession, and ownership of the building are charged with frivolous offenses amounting to breaking up something belonging to the contractor. How did that get in there in the first place? The contractor broke into the building and took those items in there. Why was the contractor and his employees not charged in the first place? Had he not broken into the building, nothing concerning him, no possession of his or the state would have been in that building, resulting in the charge against 2 People's National Congress Reform Party members. So I'm wondering if Ms. Garnett's focus in this matter is not misdirected. I'm wondering if Ms. Garnett's focus in this matter is not skewed in the wrong direction. I want to urge you, Ms. Garnett, to take these questions to Mr. Ali, to Mr. Carl Singh, to Mr. Jagyo, who was denied government involvement in it, and to Mr. Dharamlal, who said that his government will not be bullied, clearly dismissing the second vice president's position on the matter. I will urge you to follow it up from that angle and come back with a balanced report in the Guyana Chronicle. Thank you very much.
All right, at this time, we will close out.
He said, what is the next step for the party?
What's that?
Do you have the legal right to occupy the thing? Will you be moving the court to the court? What's the next in the situation?
The next step for the party will be determined by the party and released by the party when the party thinks it's the time to do it.
All right. I think, okay. All right. Once again, thank you for joining today's press conference. Thank you to our media personnel who joined today and our live viewers on our social media platforms. Do have a wonderful afternoon.